Hello, George.
Hello.
I hear you've written a book.
I have. I just published a book, my first book, um, which is somewhat amazing for me at the age of 89 to publish a book. The book is entitled Broken Glass, and it's it's an unusual book. I suppose every author feels that about his or her book. It's unusual. This one is a little unusual to the extent that it's a book which I wrote specifically for people in the second half of life, that is 65 and beyond. And it's not a story, although it turns out to be in a way my story, but it is one man. It's a story of one man's struggle to find meaning and beauty and purpose in the midst of all the physical and mental declines that accompany old age. And the devices I've used to create this story have been aphorisms and reflections. I'm an aphorism freak. That is, I for years have collected aphorisms, and over the years I've selected a series of them that are somewhat my favorites. And what I decided to do is write a reflection on each of these aphorisms. And at the time that I did that, I was not planning on writing a book. It was just something I just did for myself. I would be contemplating a problem or something along the lines, and then an aphorism would come to mind, and I'd just sit down at the computer and wrote a reflection on the aphorism to try to understand what the aphorism said in terms of whatever was going on in my mind that triggered that thought. So I did that just for my own enjoyment. But over the years, the manuscript got to be about 50 to 100 pages. And I showed it to a few friends, and they said, you know, this deserves an audience. Why don't you write a book? And I hadn't planned on that, but I thought more about it, and I thought, well, maybe I should. And so I wound up putting everything together and deciding I would write a book. So in the last year or two, I've given myself over to collecting these aphorisms and reflections. So I have now in this book, it's 75 reflections and a total of 168 aphorisms. And it's about a 200-page manuscript. And I just published it on Amazon.com. And to my great surprise, there's been a good deal of interest here at the Masonic Village campus where I live. And so, to my great surprise, at the age of 89, I'm a published author. I'm not a writer, but I am an author. I've written one book. I've written, in the course of my career, I've written, of course, scientific articles, but never a book. And certainly nothing as philosophical and personal and confessional as this. But I enjoyed writing it, and I find it very good. I really believe that any older person who reads the book will find something that's helpful to them on their journey. There's nothing in the book that's unique to me. Carl Rogers, the renowned psychologist, once said that which is most personal is most universal. And the things that happen to older people physically and mentally, socially and otherwise, these are things that happen to all of us. The details may vary, the magnitude may vary, but the problems are the same. Arthritis is arthritis, dementia is dementia, back pain is back pain, fear is fear, loss is loss, love is love. And so that's what I wrote about were my struggles, but there's nothing unique about my struggles. It's just that I happen to write about them in a certain way, which I hope would be meaningful to the reader. So that's what I've been doing for the last several months. It's taken up most of my time. And I gave a book reading here in my retirement community last week, and it was very well received. And people are buying the book, which makes me very happy. Not because I have any royalties from the book, because I don't. I've chosen not to have royalties. I want this book to be my testament, my legacy, my gift to the world for whomever reads it. So I'm not making any money on it. So I'm excited about people buying the book, not for any monetary value for me, but because I want people to be exposed to the ideas that might help them along their way. So yeah, that's the book, and it's a new and exciting phase. And as I mentioned, in 2 months I'm going to be 90 years old. To do this at the age of 90 is a total surprise, and I'm very grateful for it.
What's one of your favorite passages or aphorisms from the book, and why?
Well, I don't know that I have a favorite one. As I mentioned, I have 168 of them in the book. But an aphorism is a saying, a very pithy comment that summarizes usually a moral thought behind the saying. And I don't know that I have one. I suppose what I could do is get the book and read one from you and show you what I want. Let me read the first aphorism, which explains the title of the book. The book is entitled Broken Glass. And what I've noticed, by the way, on Amazon, there are all sorts of books that are entitled Broken Glass. There must be 10 or 15 different books. So there's nothing unique about my title. But I chose the title because of the first essay. So let me tell you what that is. My first saying is, it's entitled, "Look, isn't that odd? Glass shines brighter when it's broken. I never noticed that." Now that's a saying that was taken from Leonard Bernstein, the American composer and conductor. In 1976, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis asked Leonard Bernstein to write something for the inauguration of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. So he wrote this operetta entitled Mass. And as part of the Mass, there is a scene, a relatively unimportant scene, but it struck me as important, as a large pane of glass falls to the stage and shatters in 1,000 pieces. And the priest in the opera says, he looks at the glass and he says, "Look, isn't that odd? Glass shines brighter when it's broken. I never noticed that." And that's why I got the title Broken Glass. And it's meaningful to me because of this that I wanted to read, because this explains the whole book to me in actuality. I wrote the following: "The broken glass is an eloquent metaphor for life. Sooner or later, we're all broken by the exigencies of life. As Ernest Hemingway once said, the world breaks everyone. The beautiful pane of glass, once resplendent in its beauty, now lies shattered beyond repair, never to be the same again. A body broken by disease, a mind tortured by stress and anguish and tragedy, a marriage fractured beyond reconciliation, a family torn asunder, a career filled with heartbreak and disillusion, and all this we're robbed of our innocence and our beauty and lie humbled in disarray. The power and meaning of this story is that the shattered pieces of broken life exhibit a beauty all their own. If we can get beyond the ugliness we see in ourselves and others, we can catch glimpses of a special beauty that lies some more deep beneath the surface, a beauty that comes from suffering itself." So what I wanted to say with that is that, in a way that summarizes the whole book, namely, we're all stuck with aging. We're all stuck with decline. We're all stuck with our degree of brokenheartedness. Most people do not see their dreams fulfilled in life. Many marriages don't turn out as they'd hoped. No one goes to the altar thinking about getting divorced. And yet lots of marriage ends in divorce, ends in tragedy. So we all have our suffering through life. That's simply a part of the arc of biology. That's who we are. Suffering and joy, sorrow and joy are twins, Janus sides of the same coin. And so what I wanted to say in this is what this first little essay demonstrates, namely, the pane of glass shatters. That's life. But what the priest didn't realize, that in the shatteredness, in the ugliness, in the brokenness of it all, lies immersed, sometimes hidden, the possibility of a special beauty that only the suffering of the brokenness can bring out. And what I wanted to write in this book is what I've discovered for myself, that two things are important as one grows older. One has to come to grips with what is, because it's not going to go away. Your arthritis is not going to go away. Your cancer is not going to go away. Your dementia is not going to go away. Your heartbreak with the kids is not going to go away. Your unfulfilled dreams in life is not going to go away. It is what it is. So happiness does not require going away, making it disappear. We have to find a way to accept who we are, where we are, and what we are. And we have to find a way to find meaning and purpose and beauty in the midst of the shattered glass. And what I wanted to do with this little book was just portray one man's struggle of how to move in that direction. The struggle, one man's my struggle, and I don't claim that I have found the answer. I do claim that it's a necessary task of growing older to struggle, the painful struggle of working toward that. But that struggle is a noble struggle. And that's what part of the wintertime of life is all about. You see, I really believe that life is divided into 4 seasons, just like the seasons of nature. There's a springtime of life where you grow up as a child, you get your education, you know what you're supposed to do in life, you prepare yourself for life, you find a mate, you get married, you raise a family. That's all the springtime of life, filled with energy, filled with dreams, filled with hope. And then there's a summertime of life, somewhere maybe between 30 and 50 maybe, where you have your education, you have your family. Now it's time for you to make your contribution to the community in whatever career, whatever you do for life. But you have to make your community, your commitment, I should say. And then there's the autumn time of life, somewhere maybe mid-50s until about 65, where you've made your career. Or you've not made your career. Your dreams maybe have been fulfilled, or they've not been fulfilled. The kids have grown up, they're in college, you have commitments, you can't walk away. It is what it is. You begin to notice some changes in your body. You're not as sharp as you were, but you've worked hard. You've made your contribution. You've been a good father or a good mother. You've done your best. And now it's time to begin to let go and begin to reap some of the harvest that comes from a lifetime of work. Parents who have raised their kids, they did the best they could. The kids are growing. And if the relationship is good, the kids will realize the sacrifices that mom and dad made, and that now it's their turn to begin to take care of mom and dad. That's part of the relationship. It's not necessarily payback, but it's just the normal biology and time of life in the harvest, where mom and dad are beginning to grow older and slowing down. And then there's the winter time of life. I'm in that time of life. From about 65 on, where the career is over, the kids have grown, they've moved on, you're starting to get grandkids, maybe even great-grandkids, and there are other things to be done in the wintertime of life. See, I really do believe that there are tasks in each time of life. There are tasks that have to be mastered in the springtime of life. You have to get an education. You have to have career. You have to make a contribution. You have to achieve something. So each task, spring, summer, and fall, has tasks. And when you don't achieve those tasks, when someone doesn't fulfill the tasks in the springtime of life, the summertime and the autumn are very hard, because you spend the rest of your time trying to do what you should have done in the springtime of life. People who don't have an education spend the rest of their life trying to make up for that. So what we don't learn to do in the appropriate time of life, we spend the rest of our life trying to make up for it, relationally, career-wise, and so on. In the winter time of life, I'm persuaded there are tasks too. I don't really believe in retirement. Now, granted, I'm not working anymore, but the idea of I'm my age, it's time for me to kick back, and I'm here, I paid my money, you take care of me. I don't believe in that at all. I believe that the idea of kicking back and letting the world treat me because I'm 89 is an Americanism which has no inherent value. The truth of the matter is, the winter time of life, there are tasks to be done. And I believe that part of the task of the winter time of life is to learn how to be wise, to learn how to look back upon your life and connect the dots. Because it's all of a piece. It's all of a piece. And it takes a certain amount of time lived to begin to see where it is all of a piece. And so I think there's a wisdom that comes with a certain time of life in winter where you have time and your job is to try to understand, who am I? What am I here for? What am I supposed to do? What does my life mean? Like, okay, good. I had a lot of sex. I was a career. I did this. I did all these things. Is that the sum total of my life? And at my age in life, you realize there has to be more to it than that. And so, asking these questions, your education is helpful, but it doesn't answer. All the education I've had, and I've had a wonderful education, did not give me the answer to these questions. These are things I've had to find out on my own, and that's the work of this time of my life. In the Indian culture, I don't mean Native American, I mean Indian culture, life is divided into three stages: growth, maturity, and separation. And in the separation phase, that's when a man retires and he leaves his family, either physically or metaphorically, and he goes out into the forest, either physically or metaphorically, in order to find out who he is and what life's about. And there's something about that, I think that's true. Now, we don't know how to do that in the West. We struggle with retirement in the West because we define our identity by what we do. But in the East, it's not by what you do, it's by who you are. It's not by doing, it's being. So we in the West have trouble knowing what the winter time of life is about. But in actuality, the winter time of life is a very, very valuable and important and productive time of life. And I think part of this book has been trying to address that. I really believe that the winter time of life is rich and powerful, and very meaningful. I recognize that if you're overwhelmed with pain, and if you're in the midst of dementia, that makes it very difficult. I understand that. But I also understand that if you wait to the very last moment of your life to take these things seriously, the window of opportunity is probably closed. If you wait to your deathbed to find out what your life was all about, you probably waited too long. So I really do believe that this kind of asking ourselves these questions in the winter time of life is a kind of a preparatory kind of thing. You can't wait to you're 85 or 90 to ask the question, what is my life is about? These things you should have asked before, but it's part of the task of who we are that I think makes life meaningful. I would have patients in my medical practice, older men, 75 or 80 years old, who were still trying to be young studs. Older women who are still trying to wear super short skirts. And I always felt sorry for these people because they were trying to be something that they maybe one time were at 30 or 35, but not at 75. And they were trying to do at 75, which they were not able to do or didn't do at 35 or 25. And you can't make 25, you can't make 75 be 25. You can't be 88 years old and try to talk like a cool young dude. You can't do that. It comes off bad. Young people laugh at you. And so it's a matter of understanding that at certain times of life, not in a rigid way, but in a slow, maturing way, we adopt new habits of thinking, which should be appropriate for the age in which we live. So I always worry about my older patients who've never thought about dying. What do you mean you're 80 years old and you never thought about death? Are you kidding me? Of course you think about death. And if you haven't thought about death when you're 80 years old, you should, because it's around the corner. And why are you not thinking about it? You don't have to think about it in a morbid way, but to think about death is to think about life. And so people my age should be thinking about these big thoughts. As I said, not in a morbid way, but in a productive, general, holistic way that I think makes life much richer.
You ingeniously connected tasks to these different seasons of life. What would you say the emotion is, or can be, or was for you for each of these seasons of life?
Well, I think the emotion, I think I make a distinction between emotion and content of the emotion. I think the content changes over time. There were times in my life when my emotion was centered, the content was getting into medical school and becoming a doctor, or fulfilling my sexual desires, or becoming a successful, caring physician and making a contribution to my society. Very intense emotional feelings and commitment. I would say at this time in my life, the intensity is the same, but the content is different. I feel very passionately about what I've written in this book because I feel passionately about the meaning, finding meaning and purpose in my life. So I think I'm an intense person, and I think looking back upon my life, I've been an intense person most of my life. What has changed has just been the content of the intensity. But I think that's the way it should be. So I think for me at 89 to be intense about wanting to hang on to my doctor's image is inappropriate. Something's wrong. Or trying to be intense about being a young person is wrong. That was right when I was a young person, but it's not right when I'm an older person. I think there's an intensity about being an older person which is appropriate for the age in which we live. Many of my neighbors and friends here where I live, they have moved into passivity, which is not to be distinguished from serenity. Passivity is not the same thing as serenity. Passivity is a sense of disengagement, to disengage with the world. That's what I see many of my neighbors. They're disengaged. They engage their television set. They engage their concentration on their bowels. They engage their concentration on what time we're going to eat. And that's their engagement. That's the limit of their world. That's a form of disengagement from meaningful things. I get it that people watch TV 24 hours a day, but I think that's a sad commentary on the content of the wintertime of life. But serenity is a feeling of peace in the midst of activity. It's not sitting in a room all alone, and I am for silence and solitude. Definitely, that's a part of my life. but not as an escape from the world. I think I've learned that it's possible to be peaceful in the midst of activity. So much of my life, my activity was accompanied by a kind of a frenetic overactivity. It's because all my life I was trying to cover up my insecurity and overachieving. I always wanted to be numero uno in everything I did. I couldn't accept who I was. I always wanted to be I'm not okay, but you're okay. So you okay, but I wasn't okay. So I wanted what you had. That's the story of my life. That was a big mistake. It never helped me early on in my life accept who I was and what I was. And so it's only as I've grown older that I've begun to move away from that kind of freneticism that's based on insecurity and move into a serenity based on I am what I am. I like who I am. I have regrets about it. I recognize my shortcomings and my sins, but I am who I am. I accept who I am. I accept where I am. I accept what I am. That's taken me a lifetime to get to this point just to say that. And that has moved me from an excessive wannabe kind of activity to a relaxed pace of who I am without becoming passive. I'm not passive at all. I'm deeply engaged with my community and with my activities of life. But at the same time, I have a sense of contentment about who I am and what I am. And that's come as the end of a struggle of trying to find out who I am, what I'm supposed to be in this life, and what are the important things in my life, and what is no longer important. That's one of the things I've learned. The things that I thought were once important are no longer important. That doesn't mean that they weren't important then. I do not believe for a minute that the dreams that I had and the intensities I had in my earlier life were not important. They were important. Sexuality was important. My career was important. My marriage was important. My approval from my colleagues and peers was important. That's appropriate. But I no longer need that. My need for approval has changed. Specifically, I have only a few friends left, and I cherish them to my breast. And their approval means a great deal to me. God's approval means everything to me. So I think the content of my emotional intensity has changed as I've changed, but I remain an intensive person, but I'm not passive. I can tell you how I most of my life have defined myself. I'm a man. I'm a doctor. I'm a professor. I'm a caring human being. I'm a husband. I'm a Christian. I'm successful. And all those things are true. But the list has changed. So those are external. Those are attributes that I've kind of listed on my best foot forward. This is who I am, and they're all good. The question is that all you are? There's a time in my life when I thought that was all who I was. That was sufficient. Like, what more do you want from me, right? I've come to see that there's nothing wrong with that list. That list is not proven to me to be good but insufficient. If it's insufficient, like what's lacking? It's hard for me to put it into terms. This is just one person, okay? I'm one grain of sand, okay? I do not want to generalize for anyone else, but I am more than being a doctor. I am more than having an MD and a PhD and a master's in theology. I am more, and that's all good. I went to good schools. I went to Harvard. I went to Zurich. I went to wonderful schools. And I've lived all over the world. That's not to be discarded. But I am more than that. I am more than the sum of the places I've been or the things I've done. I am a human being who has spent his lifetime trying to realize that I am not the creator, I'm the creature. That's an amazing thing to say, to realize when you have been very successful and very bright and very this and very that, to realize that, George, you're not the creator. You may think you are, but you're not. You're just a creature. George, do we understand that now? And so it's taken me a long time to make peace with that. And that has been a piece of puzzle that has been missing in my own little puzzle of my life. And so I think what I'm saying is that there's a spiritual dimension of my self-definition, which has come very, very slowly in my life to realization, to be operationalized in my own daily life. And I'm to the point in my life where that is the spiritual dimension of my life has become the most important aspect of my life.
You get a lot of comfort from the spiritual dimension in your life. And maybe all of these roads, broken or not, led you there. How long did it take to get there? And is there something looking back on that path that you felt like if you had just turned this way or that way, you could have gotten there quicker and would want to get there quicker? Or did everything just kind of happen in its own natural tempo?
Yeah. That's an important question for me because much of my life, I've looked back upon my life, particularly in the recent years, and said, wow, if I had just done this or not done that, if I had been there and not there, or if I had not done that crazy thing, if I had not done that, acted out in a certain way, if I, right? And I used to plague myself with that. I no longer believe that. I think the truth of the matter is, I really do believe our lives are all of a piece. Namely, I made certain decisions and did certain things and went to certain places at certain times in my life because I think that's what I thought was in my best interest. It wasn't like I had some big head of wisdom and philosophical about this and sitting down and wondering, that isn't how I live my life. I don't think that's how any young person lives their life. You see a pretty girl, you want to date her. You fall in love, you want to get married. You see an opportunity for a job, you go do it. You have an opportunity to move to a certain place, you do it. You weigh the pros and the cons, but you have a certain amount of life. And I look back upon my life and I realize we make decisions based upon the light that we have. And I think at 25, you have a certain light. At 35, you have a certain light. And at 50, you have a certain light. So if that's true, why at 50 do I fault myself for decisions I made when I was 25? When I was 25, I didn't have the wisdom I had at 50. And when I was 50, I didn't have the wisdom that I have now. So I do not spend my life now bemoaning and doing mea culpa about the bad decisions I made in my life. Were some of them bad? Yes. Were they harmful? Bad. Have I hurt people along the way? Yes. Do I have regrets about those? No. Do I plague myself? No. A, I've asked forgiveness, have been forgiven. B, I recognize that our time and our culture and our level of growth is all dependent on how we make our decisions. So to expect a 25-year-old to think or talk like I talk is crazy. I have no right to expect someone who's 45 to have my perspective on life. 45 is not 89. a 45-year-old has a lot of living to go through, a lot of living to do yet, a lot of mistakes to make, a lot of joy and sorrows yet to live, in order to be able to look back upon his or her life and say, well, okay, I might have done it different, but my only hope is that the person who is plagued like I was plagued with why didn't I do it different would come to understand, yes, I hurt a lot of people. I did some things bad. That is what it is. I need to apologize where I can apologize. I need not, on the other hand, to go through life with great regret so that it overwhelms me and I obsess on it. I can't obsess on my mistakes. That's a psychiatric illness unto itself. One has to recognize and own what he has to own, do what he can to make reparation, and get on with his life. And recognize that much of our life decisions are functions of the family and the ethos of the family group we grew up with, the time we grew up, time-wise, and the culture we grew up with, and the level of education we've had. Those inform how we make our decisions. And so I'm comfortable recognizing the bad that I've done. I'm also comfortable recognizing that, in all honesty, I did the best I could with the tools that I had to work with. And it is what it is. That's in God's hands, not mine. I have to be responsible for how I live my life now. I am responsible. I have a certain level of wisdom now that I didn't have then. So I'm responsible for thinking about things now in a different way. But what is past is past.
How much of those bad things contributed to the good things that you are now? Could you be as wise if you had never done those?
No, I never would. I really think that we learn most from our suffering. I want to hear the good things. I hate the bad things, but I learn from the bad things. That's life, okay? But the truth of the matter is, joy and suffering are two sides of the same coin. All the ancient civilizations and religions of the world recognize that joy and suffering are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. You can't grow without making mistakes, because we only grow through our mistakes. I always, we love to have a high batting average. We love to have high grades. We love to be handsome and beautiful. Of course we do. But the truth of the matter is that basically says we all want to remain young. But young people are not mature. Young people are not grown. A young person is not a fully grown human being. That only comes with the kind of growth that comes with having lived life. And to live life means you make mistakes and you start over again. You learn from your mistakes. The tragedy of life is not that we make mistakes, is that if we don't learn from our mistakes. And the temptation is to make them the same mistake over and over again. The tragedy of us is to make the same mistake and call it experience, and you don't recognize it wasn't an experience, it was a bad mistake. That's one of the lessons that all surgeons learn. You make the same mistake in a surgical procedure and have a bad outcome, and you say, well, that's my experience. Well, but it's bad experience. It's a mistake you need. A mistake you need to undo your habits and learn how not to make that mistake so you get a better post-operative outcome. That's true for all of life. So I think one of the tasks of a good teacher in working with a student is to, first of all, affirm the student in his or her strengths, but to point to the student where he or she needs to grow and change. The student's not going to grow any other way. And so this is why I think it's a tragedy that in many schools, high schools today, students who do poorly are just passed on from grade to grade until they graduate. we think we were doing them a favor, we're doing them a terrible mistake. So I think suffering is necessary. I don't make suffering grandiose. I don't think life's about suffering. But I do think that suffering is an important part of life, and we have to find out how to make sense of suffering. As a matter of fact, there's a wonderful Swiss philosopher by the name of André Frédéric Emile, early 20th century Swiss philosopher. He said, "The secret of life is learning how to make use of our suffering." Isn't that great? The secret of life is learning how to make use of our suffering. Life's not about suffering, but suffering is an integral part of life. So we have to make use of suffering. And if we find how to make use of it to help us grow, we can get on with our life.
When do you think, in general, a human's age starts to become where they start to be wise?
I think about middle age. Middle age, when you're about 50, 55 years of age, okay, certain things have begun to happen. In your career, you recognize that you're either going to make it or not make it. By the time you're 55, either you're still on the ascendancy, or like most people, you've hit your plateau and you kind of sense that the plateau is going to start to go down. Your career is not over, but your dreams are probably not, you're not going to be the CEO. You're not going to make $1 million, or today $1 billion perhaps. And also you look in the mirror and you recognize there's some gray hairs on your sideburns. And you recognize that you're beginning to slow down sexually. And you're beginning to lose some of your erection. That's a terrifying experience for a man when he starts to falter in this area. Your memory starts to falter just a little bit. You're not quite as quick in recalling names. You begin to realize that at 55, you begin to be looked at more as a father figure rather than a sexual object. You recognize you don't walk as fast as you did. Your back starts to bother you. So I think at that particular point, something uncomfortable begins to happen. Namely, you're not as nimble mentally or physically as you were, and that is a rather frightening experience. And it's at that particular point that one begins to get in touch with the fact that, oh, really? Oh, well, and then if one's smart, one begins to say, well, maybe there's something more to life than having the suite of office done at the end of the hall. Maybe we've got to find out how to be a good father in other ways. So I think somewhere around mid-age, but we don't decide to do that. It's forced on us. Our bodies are much wiser than our heads. Our body begins to send us messages that we're moving toward the end of summer into fall. It's not that things are falling off a cliff. There's much yet to be done, but we are not who we were before. And when that discomforting awareness comes crashing, not crashing, comes a little bit seeping from the edges, when that comes, then it forces us to begin to think a different way. Then we're open to some truths that we never thought about. It's not a happy time. There's no such thing as deciding to be wise. We don't decide to be wise. I think wisdom comes, it's like when nothing else works, read the manual, that kind of thing. And so when life forces us into a corner, then we're forced to reconsider our lives. And then that's, I think, what makes us receptive to some thoughts about existential things of life that we never really had to think about because we were too busy doing other things.
You told me a quote one time which was so powerful. It is that you said, after an experience which can be stressful and cause you pain and suffering, you said you're a little wiser, but also a little sadder.
That's true. The two go hand in hand.
Why is that?
They don't always go hand in hand. I misspoke. I think it's when they go hand in hand, that's the blessing. Much of the time, they don't go hand in hand. You become sadder, and sadness, if it's not counteracted by wisdom, then sadness can lead to bitterness, anger, self-pity, and a lot of denial, and acting out in inappropriate ways. So when sadness is counteracted by some wisdom, and the two go hand in hand, then one can grow. So I think it's possible to grow wiser, sadder and wiser. And I think that's the best growth plan for all of us. But if one can be so self-absorbed that one just remains sad. For example, there are people in life who bad things happen to them, and they are incapable of becoming philosophical about it. So they go through life saying, I would have been a success if it had not been for my wife or my kids or my job or my boss. They project out onto all these other people the reason why things went bad. But it's never a boss or a wife or a kid or a job that explains fully why life goes bad, because one is always a personal participant in the play. And many people cannot face their own participation in their bad decisions. The truth of the matter is, a life goes bad not because I got multiple sclerosis. That's a terrible thing. But there are too many people with multiple sclerosis or any other illness who lead very, very rich, fulfilling lives. And they've learned that, yes, my illness is a bummer. I wish I didn't have it. But the core of my life is not dependent on my MS or my whatever. I wish I didn't have it, but that doesn't define me. So when bad luck defines a person, I would be fine if, then that is tragic. Because that is a one-way ticket to bitterness, self-delusion, self-absorption, and delusion. And then when one reaches that point, one's morally blind because he can never say to himself, I'm partially responsible. He can't say that to himself. It's always someone else's fault. That's an impoverished life. So suffering is a way to help us say, yes, it was bad. Bad luck is bad luck, okay? But bad luck does not define a life. Bad luck is bad luck. Most of us find a way to get up and try to find how to get on with it. But that's what life's about. No one is spared. No one is spared bad luck. No one is spared any of this stuff. That goes with life. The question is, how do we deal with it? My great teacher in life was Viktor Frankl, the great Austrian psychiatrist. I studied with Viktor Frankl and was a close friend of his for the last 25 years of his life. My relationship with Viktor Frankl was life transforming. And I'll never forget, one time he said to me, he said, George, don't ever forget this. We never have control over the things that happen to us, but we do have a control over how we choose to respond to those things. He was right. I don't have any control over the things that happen in my life. You know, as the saying goes, shit happens. That's life. No one's spared that. But I do have a control based on what's inside me about how I choose to respond to that. I can either say, it was all your fault, you're a bad guy, I hate you, and be bitter towards you, or life, or whatever. Or I can say, yeah, that is bad, you did hurt me, whatever, but I'm going to reconstitute my life because I've got to get on with it. I have miles to go, as the American poet Robert Frost said. So that depends upon one's own philosophy. Socrates once said, every man should marry. If he marries well, he'll be happy. If he marries poorly, he'll become a philosopher. And there's something to be said for that. The point is, Socrates was saying, you have to find a way to respond to the situation. If she's a great wife, then you've lucked out, man. Praise God. If it hasn't worked out, well, you're going to have to find a way to deal with it. And the way to deal with it is become a philosopher and decide how you're going to live with that. That's what we have to do.